Good evening. Today I would like to discuss the solar eclipses that we've seen in the United States and to examine whether or not there's any correlation between them and the Abraham Accords. I'd like to start by discussing this article that was published by the Wall Street Journal on the 18th of April of this year, entitled "The White House Makes a Fresh Push for a Historic Deal to Forge Saudi-Israel Ties." And in this article, they discussed the renewed push to get Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords in exchange for Israel moving to a two-state solution. I emailed a question to all three authors on this report in the Wall Street Journal asking, was there a high-level remote meeting between the U.S. and Saudi between 4 and 18 April? I received an answer from one of the authors, quoted, "Hi, I don't know that for sure, but my guess is yes, and thank you for reading." Well, the report was published on the 18th of April. Had to be in preparation prior to that. You might ask, well, why were you interested in the 4th of April? It turns out that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan was scheduled to go to Riyadh to meet with Mohammed bin Salman and discuss these issues. He was supposed to arrive on the 4th of April in Riyadh, but the day prior to that visit, he had to cancel his trip because of a cracked rib. And as a result, I was curious as to whether or not this report in the Wall Street Journal had something to do with Jake Sullivan canceling his trip. I suspected that there must have been a remote meeting in the week leading up to the Wall Street Journal report, and I found this department press briefing on the 15th of April 2024 with the department spokesperson, Matthew Miller. Now, in this briefing, in response to a question about Saudi Arabia, Mr. Miller was quoted as saying, "In terms of work with Saudi Arabia, you saw the secretary speak to his Saudi counterpart yesterday, and that would have been the 14th of April, and that discussion had to do with the Iran strike on Israel." He went on to say, "I think he spoke to him, that is the foreign minister, last Thursday the 11th or Wednesday the 10th. And continuing to work for a long-term lasting resolution to the conflict and a pathway to two states and ultimately normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel that would provide regional peace and security for years to come." And so this conversation between our Secretary of State and the Saudi Foreign Minister covered the elements of the Abraham Accords in exchange for a two-state solution on the part of Israel. Now, the report was exclusive to the Wall Street Journal. However, there was a news release in the Saudi media which confirmed that indeed the Saudi foreign minister had had a phone call with Anthony Blinken on the 11th, which was Thursday. Now, this news release did not discuss the details that were contained in the Wall Street Journal report, but it did confirm the meeting that was held. So after Jake Sullivan canceled his trip on the 4th of April, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia went ahead and had a remote meeting on the 11th of April. And the results of this meeting were released as an exclusive to the Wall Street Journal and to no other media outlet. This indicates a coordinated response that I think is designed to put pressure on the nation of Israel and on Prime Minister Netanyahu to cause them to move forward towards a two-state solution. And as you know, there was a total solar eclipse on the 8th of April of this year, which crossed the American Southwest to the northeast on the 1st of Nisan, 2024. The path of this eclipse took it right across central Texas, which is where I live. And this is a photograph of that eclipse made by one of my sons at the peak of the eclipse. Here's another view of that eclipse from a second son that lives in Dallas. And this photograph was taken by a friend who lives locally. It was quite spectacular. So the eclipse happened on the 8th of April, 2024. 3 days later, the U.S. and Saudi Arabia had a discussion remotely in which they discussed a renewed push for the Abraham Accords and pressure Israel to move forward with the two-state solution. As a matter of review, you may recall the total solar eclipse that crossed America on August 21st of 2017. And this eclipse traveled from the American Northwest to the Southeast, in the process crossing several towns named Salem. And Jared Kushner had left on the day of the eclipse, and then he met with Mohammed bin Salman on the day after the eclipse on the 22nd of August, as reported here, to discuss the deal of the century, which was the first iteration of the Abraham Accords. We then had an annular eclipse that crossed the United States, again northwest to southeast. It was an annular eclipse on the 14th of October of 2023. And this eclipse was followed the day after by a meeting in Riyadh between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, in which they discussed the Gaza war and also plans to push forward with the Abraham Accords and the two-state solution. So if we look at eclipse correlations with the Abraham Accords, we now have 3 eclipses that crossed the United States that were followed in close proximity from 1 to 3 days by 3 meetings between Saudi Arabia and the USA, in which a two-state solution was discussed and the Abraham Accords. Now, the first eclipse was the deal of the century, but this morphed into the Abraham Accords. The question that I'm wondering is this a warning to the United States because of its leading role in pushing for the two-state solution, which leads to the division of the land of the everlasting covenant? Looking forward to this fall, there's a 4th eclipse, and this is on the 2nd of October of 2024, and this is on the eve of the Feast of Trumpets, or Yom Teruah, which follows on the 3rd and 4th of October. This eclipse follows very closely the UN Summit for the Future on the 23rd of September of 2024, which is the exact 7-year anniversary of the sign of the woman in labor. Now, as we've discussed in a previous video, this annular eclipse does not cross the United States, but instead crosses a vast area of uninhabited South Pacific Ocean. Now, we know from the scripture that the great waters represent nations in many passages, and so I believe this eclipse may be directed to the nations. So does the annular eclipse of the 2nd October 2024 point to a possible judgment of the nations? Is this when Jacob's land will be deeded to Esau by the world, thus breaking the everlasting covenant made to Jacob and his descendants, as discussed in Genesis 17, Psalm 105, and 1 Chronicles 16? In response for the two-state solution, will Saudi Arabia join the Abraham Accords, thus strengthening that particular covenant? If so, this could possibly mark the onset of Daniel's 70th week, as we've discussed in prior videos. So we have a lot to look forward to in the coming months leading up to this fall. It may be even more chaotic or hectic than what we're seeing today, for reasons that I'll go over in future videos. So in any case, we know that he is in total control, and we can have his peace. Shalom, he is sovereign. Nothing catches him by surprise. Thank you for listening.